Good afternoon, everybody. We have people gathering. We'll give reporters just a couple more seconds to join or a couple more minutes to join because we've had more RSVP than are on the line. And we don't want to get started until we have as many as possible. Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for an update on the Draco program. I'm Tabitha Thompson with DARPA Public Affairs. With me in the room are Dr. Tabitha Dodson, Program Manager for the Draco program, Dr. Anthony Calabino, who's the Space Nuclear Technologies Portfolio Manager for NASA. I also have Sarah Fraser with NASA Public Affairs. On the line are Kirk Shireman, Vice President for Lunar Exploration Campaigns at Lockheed Martin, and Joe Miller, President of BWXT Advanced Technologies. Their communications folks are also on the line in case there's any follow-up that you need to take care of after today's call. Each participant will give a brief update and then we'll take your questions. To signal that you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand or drop your question in the chat. When you do so, please say your name when we call on you. Please say your name, your outlet, and to whom you'd like to direct your question. With that, we'll start with Dr. Dodson.
Hello, everybody. So up front, I believe we're all going to give some remarks. So I'm up first. So I'd like to start off by saying that the benefits of a nuclear thermal propulsion reactor, such as the one that Draco is developing in the space domain, are understood and accepted by the power and propulsion communities as a step change in current capability. Those benefits provided by nuclear reactors in the space domain can be compared to the benefits that the Navy enjoys having reactors on ships and submarines in the sea domain. Many programs throughout the decades have been created, inspired by the benefits of nuclear propulsion, with one of the most successful programs being the Rover/Nuclear Engine for Rocket Vehicle Applications, or Rover-NERVA program, running nearly 50 years ago over the span of 20 years. Unfortunately, this and past programs over the decades were shelved due to shifting priorities. The technical capabilities, including early safety protocols, remain viable today. The Draco program up front sets very clear rules and guidelines, which hopefully can help to take a variety of programmatic and technical questions off the table. For instance, we are never turning the reactor on the ground. Therefore, transportation and launch site operations are all greatly simplified because a reactor that has never been turned on is cold and benign. You can put your hand right inside the core and touch the fuel like you would any other heavy metal. The Draco program is a series of in-space reactor experiments and ultimately a flight test of the nuclear thermal rocket engine using high-assay, low-enriched uranium, or HALEU fuel. The use of HALEU fuel is what makes this reactor unique as compared to the other nuclear thermal rocket programs, which all used highly enriched or weapons-grade uranium. This will be the primary focus of the Draco demo, and the act of collecting data on the HALEU reactor will define mission success, as this data will help NASA and the DoD understand the benefits and potential challenges going forward for using HALEU fuel in future nuclear space reactors. Testing this engine on the ground is not possible today. There are no facilities available to accommodate the assortment of experiments needed to get the reactor to a high enough power level and therefore hot enough to get sufficient data on the uncertainties associated with the HALEU reactor. We cannot use the same test site that Rover NERVA used because there have been several policy changes since then, in addition to the old test facilities being mothballed. The burdens associated with attempting to revive that ground test capability are forecasted to be not impossible, but at least large enough where it is difficult for the DoD or NASA to justify investment upfront without at least some data on the viability of this kind of HALEU engine. Besides the way the Draco program has been structured, there are several things which gives me great confidence personally that this program is achievable within our defined schedule. Rover NERVA brought the nuclear thermal engine to TRL-6 into a state of flight readiness. They built 23 nuclear thermal reactors and engines, and we're at the point where they were building 3 nuclear thermal reactors per year. We have seen that a nuclear thermal rocket is possible to build. Performance was demonstrated, measured, and achievable on the ground. We have the confidence in our selected industry team and in this technology that the Draco program can be done and sent to space for our in-space demo in 2027. I personally believe that we have an obligation now to take advantage of this moment in time with the Draco program, where we have a window of opportunity and political support, and therefore funding to finally advance nuclear thermal propulsion for our nation and for the future of humanity to someday conduct more advanced space operations with the enormous benefits provided by nuclear reactors.
Thank you, Dr. Dodson. And just a reminder, we'll hold your questions until the end of the remarks from the participants. So, Dr. Calamino.
Thank you. Thank you, Tab, as well. Well, I'm really happy to be here today. It is the culmination of actually, as Tab mentioned, all the way back to Rover NERVA in the 1960s, up until even the last 5 or 6 years worth of investment by NASA and looking at this technology, and then finally finding the synergy in a partnership with DARPA to pursue a flight demonstration of that capability in space in the next 3 years. I go back to, and I think about Kennedy's famous statement. He said, "We don't choose to go to the moon." But he also said in that, and if you listen, he says, "and do the other things because they are easy, but because they are hard." Those other things were nuclear propulsion. And that was part of that speech and part of the things that NASA was looking at the time. The excitement we have is that these are technologies, if we're going to expand our footprint into deep space, if we're going to look at having a sustained presence on the lunar surface, looking maybe towards a lunar economy, there are really 3 things that are important when you think about expanding. One is infrastructure, communications infrastructure. The other one is power infrastructure, and then finally transportation infrastructure as well. As we expanded west, those were the infrastructures that we wanted to put in place at the time that really allowed us to be able to have a sustained presence and thrive in that environment. And I think that they're basically the same sorts of infrastructure that we're looking for a lunar economy. In this regard, nuclear technology, in particular, those fission technologies, are impactful or play a big part in both the power infrastructure, in terms of surface power as well as space power, but also in terms of transportation. both nuclear thermal propulsion and nuclear electric propulsion capabilities. The big interest, or one of the key interests that NASA has in this technology is it really comes down to very often about mass. It's what is it that I need to leave Earth with to be able to complete a mission, to be able to sustain a mission in space. And often that comes to the amount of mass that I've got to leave Earth with to complete that mission. The nice thing about nuclear propulsion capabilities is that they are much more efficient in the way that they use the mass that they need from Earth, the propellant that we leave Earth with to fuel them. And NTP systems can be 2 to 3 times more efficient than current chemical systems in space. That's a big savings. And when we look at NEP systems, they can be upwards of 5 or more times more efficient for moving around in space. The other nice thing about these technologies is that they allow for more Earth independence, but they also allow for deep space transportation because the solar flux begins to drop off. So our ability to actually harvest energy from the sun drops off as well. And a nuclear reactor will operate with the same performance in and around the lunar surface or the Earth's surface as it would around the surface of Mars. And obviously, our ultimate goal is looking to do a human exploration mission to Mars. And NTP is one of those capabilities that when we look at really enhances the overall mission architecture that we would need to put together, and all of the mass that we would need to actually supply to a mission to Mars, and then return those explorers back home as well. We've been working with industry on this over the time. NASA's not been doing it by itself. We've been engaged with the Department of Energy. We've been working with DARPA for for 2 or 3 years right now. We have industry partners that have been on board. It was very encouraging to see that the industry capabilities that have been developed over the last few years are those that are being used here in these contracts. We feel that we're really at the point now where we have those technologies pushed far enough down the road that we can take and build system hardware and actually integrate that system hardware into a complex capability, a nuclear propulsion system. Put that into a space environment and test it and see how the overall system is going to operate. So we are really looking forward to this opportunity. And I think there's a lot of exciting things that are going to come in the next 2 to 3 years.
Thank you, Anthony. Again, a reminder, we'll go next to Kirk Shireman with Lockheed Martin. Please continue to raise your hand. We're taking your names down and we'll get to you at the end. Kirk?
Hey, good morning. Thanks. It's really exciting to be here and talk to you about this today. I think Tab and Anthony covered the main points. I just feel like quantum changes in propulsion and propulsion efficiency have occurred over time since Goddard tested the first rocket back in 1926. In order for our country, for our species to further explore space, changes in more efficient propulsion, higher thrust propulsion is really, really important. And I think we're on the cusp of that here. So really excited to be part of this program. Lockheed Martin, together with our partner BWXT, we think we bring spacecraft expertise and nuclear expertise here. We're going to put this together. We're going to fly this demonstration, gather a bunch of great data, and really, we believe, usher in a new age for the United States, for humankind, to support our space exploration missions. So thanks very much, and glad you guys could come out today, and looking very much to answering your questions and then executing this program.
Thank you, Kirk. Next, we'll go to Joe Miller at BWXT.
Thank you, Tabitha, and thank you, Kirk and Anthony and Tab. At BWXT, we're also extremely excited, and this type of work scope and program is exactly where BWXT loves to thrive. It's all about delivery of nuclear reactors for very important missions, and like my other colleagues just discussed, those missions span all of space through LEO to the cislunar volume and on to Mars and beyond. And being the nuclear reactor provider for that is very important to us. And so bringing our resources to bear throughout the NASA nuclear thermal propulsion contract and now DARPA Draco has been an important strategic capability that we've been developing and being able to utilize throughout our entire enterprise within BWXT. So using our facilities and the ability to manufacture a variety of different fuels to go through a test program over the last half decade has given us a lot of insight on exactly what the reactor needs to be, how it will be manufactured, all the development and material science and reactor design and theory that has to go into this reactor has really allowed us to understand what to deliver and how to deliver throughout the program. So we're more than excited to be part of Lockheed Martin's team and being able to supply this reactor in the next few years to DARPA and to NASA and to enable this very important mission. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So the first question will go to Steve Trimble with Aviation Week. So please, sorry, Steve, if you could just say who you're directing your question to, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. It's really for anybody who can answer on the panel, but I wanted to kind of skip forward to the launch authorization process under the new or the 2019 presidential memorandum. Can you describe how the launch authorization process would work for Draco, and when do you apply for launch authorization if you haven't done so already?
So for the Draco program, we have been briefing the Interagency Nuclear Safety Review Board quarterly ever since they were created after NISPM 20 came out. We will be creating what's known as a safety analysis report for the mission, or MSAR, and then the INSERB will create their SIR, the Safety Evaluation Report, shortly prior to us going to the Secretary of Defense, which we are targeting about a year before we launch. So that would be approximately February 2026 at this time, that we would be targeting going to the SecDef with both our SAR and also the SIR from the INSERB.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, next question is Tim Fernholz with Quartz. Tim, are you able to unmute? Oh,
yeah, I think you just did. Can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Thank you so much for having this telecon. I had a question for Kirk and for Joe on a safety issue. I understand when this program was announced, I talked to Dr. Calamino, and I guess the main safety risk is if there's a launch anomaly and this vehicle ends up going into the ocean. And I'm curious at this design stage, what you can tell me about how the vehicle will prevent criticality in that scenario.
Yeah, I can take that one, Kirk. This is Joe Miller from BWXT. So it's all part of the design. It's a great question because of the configuration of the fuel, the configuration of the reactor as part of the engine system. Part of that design is ensuring its safety during launch. And a subset of that is if the situation were to occur where it would go into the water. So it's part of how we've designed the core and what additional content has to be included in that reactor core during the launch and potentially manipulated prior to its operation once in space.
Hey, and if I could add to that, Joe, thank you for doing that. We, the United States, frankly, I will say the spacefaring nations have a long history of launching material. You know, RTGs is a great example. And we know how to do analysis on launch vehicles in the presence of anomalies at different points on the trajectory and calculate the loads and make sure that things don't come apart completely and they're protected. So Joe's right. You inert the reactor, make sure that's protected. And then we do the analysis during part of the launch analysis phase to make sure that that we don't create a hazard to the public should something like that occur. So I believe we can ensure that. That's work going forward, but that is certainly our design requirements to make sure that's the case.
Okay, thank you both, and thank you, Tim. Jeff Faust with Space News.
Hi, good afternoon. Question probably for NASA and DARPA. I did not see in the announcement anything about the size of the contract and the contracting mechanisms. Is this a fixed price contract? Is this other transaction authority? How's this being done, and how much are you paying the Lockheed BWXT team to produce this vehicle? Thanks.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take that question. So as an other transaction agreement, the funding will be milestone based. And for Draco, if all the milestones are committed and funded, including the phase 3 option, the agreement's value is estimated to be about $499 million. And so about roughly half of that is to DARPA, so roughly $250 million to DARPA. And then roughly half of that NASA, so roughly $250 for the NASA side for the obligation.
Did you have a follow-up, Jeff? Are you good?
No, appreciate that. Maybe just a quick follow-up to Kirk and Joe. Can you provide an estimate of how much you are providing your own internal investment into this project, if any? Thanks.
Yeah, this is Kirk. We have and will continue to. We've invested a bunch of our research and development and time, energy, facilities to go on this, but I don't have an exact number. So I'll get with Gary Napier, our PAO, our communications expert here on and see if we can answer that better. But at this point in time, I can tell you we have a significant investment. I just don't have a specific dollar value for you.
Yeah, and this is Joe Miller. I'll answer pretty much the same as Kirk did, and you can reach out to Chris Dumond. And our investments have been focusing on fuel development because that literally at the core of the reactor is the most important technology for this, especially for the temperature regime in which the reactor will operate. So we've been investing over the course of the last 5 or 6 years in that technology, as well as a few fabrication and manufacturing development technology that enables this reactor. But the exact dollar figure, I'll turn that over to Chris as a follow-up.
Okay, thank you both. And thank you, Jeff. Lauren Grush with Bloomberg.
Hi, thank you so much. I was curious if you have a flight profile for this mission yet. In the press release, or in Lockheed's press release, it mentioned the reactor won't be turned on until it reaches a nuclear safe orbit. Just curious where that is exactly and what the disposal will be like for this mission.
I can take that question. So right now we are looking at disposal in an orbit which complies with a few international standards and also one which the Space Force follows, which is Orbital Debris Mitigation Standard Practices, ODMSP. And in that case in particular, they prefer the demonstration to occur at about 2,000 kilometers circular. But when it comes to what you describe as nuclear safe, there is another policy out there that says as long as we are in space long enough whereby our fission products can decay back to the level of radioactivity that we were at launch. So essentially our orbital decay lifetime outlives our fission product inventory lifetime, then we're at a good orbit. And so for the case of the Draco reactor, that is about 300 years, which puts us around 700 kilometers. So we have the freedom, within the bounds of the various standards to operate between, say, 700 kilometers or 2,000 kilometers. circular. We haven't landed or committed to an orbit yet. Those are open discussions which we're having among our 3 agencies, but we are definitely adhering to at least 2 or 3 different standards from both a nuclear safe, quote unquote, perspective, and also from a debris mitigation perspective.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Dodson. The next question is to Richard with Orlando Sentinel.
Hi, and thanks for taking the time to cover this. I'm curious, I know the Space Force is going to set up the launch for that, and then this scenario would fall to the 2 providers in this timeline. Do we know if this is going to be require a heavy lift, and will it be Canaveral based or Vandenberg, or will that be either or? And just as a related to that, what is the planned size for this spacecraft? And I guess that would go to Kirk. And where would it be manufactured primarily? And that's it. Thank you.
Kirk, do you want me to take the first part and then you can take the part about the design and the build?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, so we're looking at launching out of the Cape. And I think that was mostly what you were asking was where, unless I didn't write the question down.
The vehicles are heavy lift.
And it won't require a heavy lift vehicle, although that would be nice to have if for some reason we needed to go to a much higher orbit. But at this point, we're looking at just an NSSL launch with a standard fairing, not heavy lift. So Falcon 9 or Vulcan Centaur.
Yeah, and you asked about where it's going to be manufactured. It's actually going to be manufactured in a number of places. And Joe can, as you can imagine, as much as I'd love to do it in my garage, they won't let me bring uranium into my garage. So the spacecraft will be manufactured largely in Denver. Joe can talk to you about the reactor and where the fuel all comes together and ultimately integrated, down at the launch site. And we'll again adhere to the launch site rules and all our constraints and requirements from handling nuclear material. So we'll do that at the final stuff at the launch site. If we launch out of KSC, which it sounds like that's probably where we will, then we'll do that at the Cape, KSC or the Air Force side.
Yep, and this is Joe Miller. The fuel and the reactor will all be manufactured in Lynchburg, Virginia, in our existing facilities, and then a few aspects of new infrastructure that BWXT has invested in for this program and other programs that we were working on.
Okay, thank you both. Next up, Eric Berger with Ars Technica.
Yeah, hi. I also support the idea of not manufacturing this in Kirk's garage. A question for Dr. Dodson, I think. Can you characterize the size of the experimental NTR vehicle and the engine? I mean, is it going to be like a Cygnus-sized spacecraft, larger, smaller? And then, what capability after this test will you actually have demonstrated? Are you going to try to ignite the engine for a few seconds, or is this a prototype for an actual engine to move stuff around cislunar space? Just trying to get a sense of where we would be in the late 2020s if this works. Thank you.
So this, if you just walked by this on the street, it would look like any other upper stage rocket engine, except there's a reactor instead of a combustion chamber there. And so we would take up an entire standard fairing just with the demonstration platform alone. If this were an upper stage, an operational upper stage, we could fit a payload on top if we were in an extended fairing, but we're not. We're just a flying test stand. And so one way that well, maybe I won't describe the demo in a way that I colloquially describe it to people. on this call, but yeah, that's roughly the size that you could interpret the engine and the stages, that of a typical upper stage that would fit in a standard fairing.
And if I could add, we probably haven't talked too much about it. It's the fuel is HALEU, as Tab was talking about, but the working fluid is liquid hydrogen, which you guys know is low mass but takes up very, very undense. There's no word for the opposite of dense, so undense. So it takes up volume, but not a lot of mass. And one of the first trades we're going to do is about that, supporting a specific launch vehicle and size of the tank. So at this point, we can't give you great dimensions on it, except that it'll fit in the boosters, the launch vehicles that the Tab was talking about. So, but know that it's a big hydrogen tank, a nuclear reactor, and a nozzle. That's about it.
And this is Dr. Kellerman for NASA. I just want to talk a little bit about what we would have as a capability after the test. I mentioned early in my introduction that the technologies that Joe Miller is speaking to and Kirk are speaking to, in terms of the reactor specifically, and getting these things matured, we're ready to understand what a full up system performance is going to look like. It is one of those things that you can make a decision you're going to do that on the ground or you're going to do it in space. But the things that we're looking for out of this test in running it for space is we're going to be actually operating it in a relevant environment of space. It will be in a zero-G environment, which is really where we would use the system. There are a lot of benefits to that. It's really going to come down to the instrumentation that we have on board to understand what the performance of that engine is, how the reactor works with the turbo machinery, what is required to actually get the reactor started up, and to get both the reactor and the turbo machinery to work together to get that done. Understanding how the neutronics of the reactor are going to interact with the flow of hydrogen. As Kurt mentioned, we're looking at hydrogen. Hydrogen has certain unique effects on the fission process itself, on the neutronics of the reactor, getting a better understanding of how that works. Also, looking what happened in terms of the response to that system as we throttle up and throttle down, shutting it down, having to go through a restart. There's, again, unique aspects to operating a reactor the second time in running it, particularly if it's a short period of time after you've already fired it. We have models, we have some ideas about how this is all going to happen, but we really don't have the experimental data to back it up. And so one of the things we're really going to come back with, we're going to come back with a very robust database that will help us better understand how that particular system is going to operate, and more importantly, how the next generation or the next design cycle on this would need to operate to optimize the performance. NASA's looking to go to Mars with this system. And this test is really going to give us that foundation, that engineering foundation that will help us to understand where it is that we need this capability and where it is that we can put this capability to make that mission a success.
I want to just add a little bit, and I think Anthony gave a superb answer to the second part of your question. It's important to keep in mind that this is a demonstration engine, just like any other test engine on a rocket engine test stand, and that NASA may need to do a series of follow-on rocket engine development work in order to get closer to their perfect operational engine. So just like any other rocket engine test campaign, the purpose of this platform is to learn. So our number one uncertainty is how the HALEU reactor will, the feedback of the HALEU reactor as we heat up. And also, unlike NERVA rover, this is a test stand which is remote and in space. So it's a flying test stand, essentially. In theory, the reactor will still be alive after the demo. We'll still be able to talk to it. We'll run out of propellant. It could make for a nice, years-long reactor criticality experiment for someone, a NASA, for instance, or even if we could refuel the tank.
If only we could go back up there and top off the tank.
Yeah. But again, it's just one big science lab in the sky, essentially.
Okay, thank you both. Next question to Bill Harwood with CBS.
Yeah, I'm just making sure I unmuted. Can you all hear me?
We can, go ahead.
All right, thanks a lot. Yeah, just to go back to launch scenarios, I was wondering if you have any idea or can bound for us how many pounds of fuel would be loaded in the reactor, radiological type fuel. And you mentioned, being able to survive launch mishaps and things like that. I mean, you all also mentioned RTGs, and of course, in that case, that plutonium, which I know this isn't, was encased in ceramics and was designed to be able to be blown into concrete if it was a launch pad explosion, and stay intact, or even a high-speed reentry. It wouldn't pose any sort of threat. How do you ensure that kind of safety with a reactor? I'm assuming there's a lot more material involved. And I'm thinking of a launch pad mishap, or if you had a major problem in orbit, if debris could pose any kind of a threat as it came down to lower altitudes or re-entered. If you could just maybe talk about that a little bit, I'd appreciate it.
So this is Anthony. Maybe I could pick up on some of it, and I'm sure that Joe Miller would be able to follow up after that. First of all, in terms of the amount of fuel, I'm not really, or propellant or fuel, I wasn't really sure, but the mission itself, the Draco will be about 2,000 kilograms of hydrogen is what we'll be taking right now. That's the current estimate on that. The amount actually, I think the amount of uranium in the core, and Joe probably can come in on that one, is somewhere probably in the neighborhood of 100 kilograms. What I want to kind of indicate, and I didn't say this earlier, I mean, you mentioned plutonium, we've mentioned radioisotope systems. I want to make it clear that fission systems are not radioisotope systems. They're very, very much different. Radioisotope systems are radioactive from the time that they are prepared to go into a generator, an electric generator, all the way up to when they're incorporated into the payload and sitting on the launch pad. Plutonium is just basically a radioactive material. Uranium 239 is without it having been fissioned and actually being surrounded by fission products, is basically a metal. It is safe to work around. It is safe to be around. It doesn't need the protection measures that need to be in place for plutonium. If you have a mishap during launch or on the launch pad itself, there is the debris that would potentially be generated by that isn't any worse than the debris that would be produced by the turbo machinery that might also be dispersed in such an accident or placed anywhere else. It is not a radioactive material at that point in time. I think we did talk about one of the major risks, or not the major risk, one of the key risks that we have, and we're looking at it, and we'll look at it carefully, is the reactor actually going into a water immersion, what we call a water immersion event, where you can actually increase the criticality on the reactor. It could, if it is not prevented from doing so, it could go active. But I think Joe talked to those in a pretty detailed way, and we have ways of putting poison wires and poison systems in place to make certain that event, if it happened, would still be able to be under the threshold of having that reactor be a hazard to the biosphere or to some other Earth sort of exposure event. And so I don't know if I've answered those two questions for you, but that's kind of my answer. Joe, I don't know if you wanted to add to it.
Yeah, I think you covered it really well, Anthony. And just to summarize, the reactor is in an inert state before launch. Once it's operated, it's in space. So that mitigates the safety issue there, the radiological safety issue. And then you covered it once again, Anthony, about having the reactor with poisons inserted as a temporary measure during launch allows us that facet of safety as well. So when you combine those two things and the protocols that exist in the regulatory review process for a reactor as coupled to an engine system, as coupled to the spacecraft, that allows not only for the design to take shape and allow us to build and deliver the reactor, but then also for the proper reviews that go through the NASA process and the process that Kirk mentioned earlier. So when you couple all of that into a program run by DARPA, you know, it allows us to have those multiple layers of safety just for launch and for operations once in space.
I wanted to add another thing here. So Anthony mentioned an accident scenario, which we consider to be almost impossible. It's that the possibility is so tiny. We have to consider every range of possibilities when it comes to accidents, of course. So the idea that the reactor could accidentally turn itself on, for instance, if it fell in the water, in a lot of instances is contrived. And so we're, in addition to all the launch inhibits that we'll have on the reactor to prevent itself from accidentally turning itself on. You know, you'll see some of this come out when we have our NEPA announcement to the public as well, maybe in a couple of months. The probabilities are very low, and if even in the event that there were an accident, the radiological release to the public would be enormously tiny. And this is in compliance with NISPM 20, the NSPM 20, which was mentioned earlier in the phone call. So there's a table that says, as long as you are, you know, almost impossible with respect to the probability of an accident, or extremely teeny tiny release to the public, so you're basically at the background radiation, then you're good to go to launch. So Draco has already done all of our preliminary analyses across the entire spectrum of possibilities for accidents, and found that we're all the way down in the low probability and all the way down in the teeny tiny amount of release. So hopefully that also helps to provide some data.
Well under the thresholds for a tier 2 mission, according to NSPM 20.
Tab, really quickly, just to confirm, the NEPA, you referenced the National Environmental Policy Act, just for clarification for those.
Yes.
Taking feverish notes.
And they use the same table as NISPM 20 when it comes to probability and release. And we pass everything with flying colors.
Great, thank you. All right, next question, Courtney Albin with C4ISRNet.
Hi, yes. I just had a follow-up question to the earlier discussion around the contract amount for DARPA. The $499 million that you mentioned, does that include all three phases, including the funding that has already been released as part of phase 1? And can you then also spell out kind of what's the specific funding for phase 2 for both the engine and the spacecraft?
So sorry, we were pondering your question over on our side, but it doesn't include the phase 1. It only includes the price for phase 2 and the phase 3 option.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. And then just to further clarify, when you say that split between almost evenly between NASA and DARPA, that's for the engine would be the NASA piece, and then the spacecraft would be the DARPA piece. I just want to.
And that's a great question, and it's something we've not commented on. So yes, your NASA's funding interest, NASA's management interest, and even their technology interest is in the engine, right? We're looking at that as a potential propulsion capability for a Mars mission, and so we're engaged in detail with that, and we've taken on the responsibility of that part of the program. And then DARPA has taken on the responsibility, as Tab has talked to, all the nuclear regulatory requirements, all of the NEPA requirements, the vehicle requirements, the vehicle integration requirements, the mission CONOPS, and actually launch authority. So when the decision, as we prepare the safety analysis and we go through the insert process, that will all follow through on a DoD line, and it would actually be the SecDev that would be the launch authority on the mission.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you both. Guy Norris with Aviation Week.
Yes, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Sorry, Guy. Yes, we can.
Okay, thanks. Could just a three-part question, if I may. Just in terms of the integration of the reactor with the engine itself, I was wondering, is the engine, would it be based around an expander cycle type of rocket? And secondly, is what's the overall ISP target for the DARPA mission, the Draco itself? And then the last but not least is the ground testing. And just wondering, is it feasible to do a follow-up ground test? It sounds like it is, but I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. So the threshold performance on this is around 700 seconds ISP on this. The design goal for the overall reactor and engine is in the mid 800 seconds is what we're looking for out of this performance. Those top end numbers are really, where NASA's interests come in, is looking at missions to deep space. It's in the 850, perhaps even extensible to the 900 second ISP numbers that we're shooting for. The other part of that question, I'm sorry, could you remind me what the second part of the question was?
Oh yeah, just
ground
on the
testing. Yeah, that's another good question. So ground testing, NASA's looked at the cost of doing a ground test. It's even a single off sort of ground test of an engine of similar type to what we're testing in space, and the costs for that are actually higher than what we're estimating it's going to actually conduct this test in space. And that is really driven by a need to capture a lot of the effluent of the engine, and to make certain that we don't have any release of potential fission products into the atmosphere. Our ability, when we certainly can design systems to do that, but they're going to be long leads to get it done. They're going to be costly to get it done. NASA would eventually need to do something that as we move towards looking to qualify an engine for transportation of cargo, high-priced cargo, or even humans. That's something we would do, but it really is sort of the first thing is find out how that engine is going to perform in terms of a prototype, which is what we're doing here, and to do that in the least cost of, the least expensive way possible to first see how that performance is going to run. And then,
right. Oh, yeah. Sorry.
And then I think you asked a question about expander cycle, and it is a standard expander cycle. You can think of the reactor as basically the combustion chamber. It's just
right.
Reactor is at about 2,700 degrees Kelvin, perhaps higher, kind of an operating temperature capability that we can have, and it is the thing that's adding all the thermal energy to that hydrogen propellant.
Right. Thank you. And just one last very clarification then. So the first time it will ignite really effectively will be in orbit, essentially.
Yeah, we call it a cold reactor, and so that reactor will have not gone through a fission event. Will have not actually brought it up to criticality before launch. It will be a cold reactor in space, and the first time that it would be turned on will be when we reach that safe orbit.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Just a reminder, if you have a question, please raise your hand. Next is David Curley with ABC. David, did you still want to ask a question?
Do you hear me now?
We can, thank you.
Sorry about that. From the Discovery Channel. Just a couple of follow-ups on operations in space. Once you turn it on, are you talking months or years? Somebody asked about disposal, and you mentioned that it'd take 300 years for the decay, so it will stay in orbit. It's never going to come down. And for Mr. Miller, have you ever done this kind of reactor? Is this, is it, I think you've done a lot of work on this in the past several years. How much work has to be done to produce this type of reactor? Thank you.
So let's see. I think I correctly wrote down the first part of the sentence. So we'll be up there for at least a couple of months conducting our on-orbit operations. Our life-limiting factor is how long we can keep the hydrogen cryogenic. This is just as much a demonstration of on-orbit storage of cryogenic liquid hydrogen as it is a demo of the nuclear thermal rocket engine. So we'll be setting a record for on-orbit utilization of cryogenic liquid hydrogen by at least 2 orders of magnitude over what's possible right now. So assuming we're successful with keeping the hydrogen in the engine, we're looking at a couple months for the demo. And the reactor will still be able to talk to it for many years after that. So again, depending on what orbit we're in, so if we are around 700 or so kilometers, we'll be up there for about 300 years. Once you get above 1,000 kilometers or 2,000 kilometers, you're up there for thousands of years. So your orbital decay lifetime is, I think it's somewhere between 10,000 to 30,000 years. I think Joe, you had, Joe Miller, I think was going to take the second part of the question.
Yep, thanks, Tab, and thanks for the question, David. So in BWXT's history, we've delivered over 400 nuclear reactors, and many of them have been one-off or first-of-a-kind reactors, and that's exactly what the DARPA Draco reactor is. It's first-of-a-kind. The materials inside of the reactors and the geometries and the nuclear fuel, we've demonstrated the ability to manufacture that over the last several years. So we started off with a variety of different materials and fuel structures and different components that were required for the reactor. And we've been able to down select the materials and the fuel type and the manufacturing process for that fuel through component level demonstrations. And so as we go through this program, we will continue with that fabrication development, something that we've been doing for several decades here in Lynchburg, and we'll be able to construct this reactor for the exact purposes. And the beauty of this program is there are a lot of design reviews and regulatory interface that happen during that process. So we feel confident not only can we manufacture the reactor, but also manufacture it and have it perform to DARPA's requirements.
Hey, and if I could add just a little bit, we kind of walked around a little bit. Let me say it this way. You know, as an engine guy, we're taking 20 degrees Kelvin hydrogen and heating it up to, you know, north 2,700 degrees Kelvin, as Anthony said, in less than a second, and then expanding it out of a nozzle. To a reactor person, what you're doing is taking liquid hydrogen at 20 degrees Kelvin and cooling your really hot reactor. You wouldn't do this terrestrially, right? You wouldn't. No one in their right mind would cool a reactor in the Earth's atmosphere with liquid hydrogen. So it is unique, but it's kind of cool. It's merging of aerospace and nuclear, and both sides can achieve their goal same time and create a new entity that'll be really exciting for our future.
Yeah, and I second the cool factor on that too, Kirk. Thank you.
Thank you both. Next, we have Marcia Smith with Space Policy Online, and thank you, David, for correcting, confirming the outlet. Marcia?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, it's sort of 2 separate questions, and one gets back to the cost. The $250 million that each of you need, is that all new money? So is there some money already in your fiscal 24 requests that are up on the Hill, and then you need to ask for money in 25, 26, and 27? Or I think you said that the money that's been appropriated already is not part of this. The 500 million, 499 million is all for just phase 2 and phase 3. So could you just sort of lay out more what the funding out years look like? And separately, someone said, if only you could refuel it. I don't know if it was Kirk or who it was, but with all the talk that's going on about propellant depots and everything, is there any chance that you could refuel this?
So this is Anthony Calamino. I'll talk from NASA's budget. We have currently in our budget, in our appropriations requests, and as well as in the discussions that are going on for 24 and into 25 from our budget request, we've included the cost of this in our budget within our in-guide budget to manage the cost of the Draco mission. We are also using some of the funds that we have in 23. As things have been going on, we're obviously still have a few months left in executing this effort. We just went on, so we've got funding for the next 3 years in our budget, and we know what the projections are beyond that, and they're also in our request. So yes, we're not talking new money, we're talking money that's currently in our appropriations or appropriation requests. And then I don't know what if you wanted to add to that, Tab, from DARPA side.
Yeah, similarly, we have budgeted for the full duration of the program on the DARPA side as well.
As far as, and it was probably me said it'd be great to go up there and top off the tank. Did you say that? Okay, do you want to answer it? Cheers.
It's okay. Yeah, in fact, the Space Force, who's paying for a ride into space, they have a great interest in refueling operations and advanced upper stage capabilities. And so we have had some discussions with them when it comes to if, say, there were a port we could design that we could put on our upper stage, especially since the Space Force is going to be involved in propellant loading while we're on the launch pad. And we may very well need a unique design for how we're going to do the prop loading. So those discussions are ongoing, and it's certainly possible. If we did have a port, and then someone did come along, say through another Space Force program to refuel the Draco stage, then we could continue to have some on-orbit operations.
If I could add a little bit to that too. So if the question, Marcia, was, is it technically capable? Is it technically possible to refuel liquid hydrogen on orbit? I think the answer, it hasn't been done yet today, but there are a number of programs, and including another one that Lockheed Martin's involved with, the SLD program, where we intend to refuel liquid hydrogen. So yes, I think it can be done in the time frame at which we would fly this demonstration. But it is a demo, right? And if it is primarily a propulsion demo. So in the end, if I still think you meet the propulsion demonstration, even if you can't refuel it. But I'm with Anthony and Tab. I'd love to refuel it and keep it around and use it for years to come.
Could I just follow up then? So does DOD own this? I mean, does this continue to be a DOD asset as long as it's in space, or does it become a NASA asset? Who would have to be involved in the decision to try refueling it?
This asset is government owned. NASA and DARPA alike. And of course, DARPA is not known for sticking around with its its platforms after a demo's over. We are known for handing it over to our transition partner. So in this case, it would be NASA and Space Force as well. Although this question of who might do more with this stage after the demo's over is TBD. But the answer to your question is that it belongs to the government writ large.
Thank you.
Okay, next question is Kenneth Chang with the New York Times. Ken, did you still want to? There we go.
Yes, sorry about that. I was wondering if someone could give me a quick explanation of the criticality issue if the reactor fell in the ocean. Is that the interaction with the water, or is it from the pressure if it fell to the bottom? Dr. Dodson had said that the chance of a release was teeny tiny. I was wondering if she could quantify that, whether that's 1% or 1 in a million. And last, a quick question. There's talk of this would shorten the travel time to Mars. Would it also lengthen the launch window? Thanks.
I'll if Tabitha doesn't mind, I can maybe answer that. I don't have the specific probability, right? If you look into NSPM 20, they obviously divide these nuclear launches in tiers, tier 1, 2, and 3. We will be in a tier 2 situation where the agency head, or in this case the department secretary, would, the Secretary of Defense would be able to approve the authorization. There are thresholds that are stated in there that we need to be below for this to happen, and I did state that we'll be below those numbers in terms of the probability of a mishap. Right, we've got the probability of the mishap would happen, and we can calculate that based on the type of vehicle that we would launch in, and we've got models for that, and then the probability that the vehicle or the reactor would actually go into the water, and then there's another probability measure that's on that our measures to keep it from going critical would not work. We have done those calculations for the INSERB preliminary. I will need to check to see if we're ready to actually go public with any of that information. I don't want to do that right now.
Yeah, we're not ready.
Yeah, and there are preliminary numbers, but the numbers that we're looking at, I said before that they squarely place us into the tier 2. So we are meeting the threshold levels for likelihood and consequence. They're in NSPM 20 right now, and we are meeting them by we're significantly lower than what those threshold numbers are. And as we finish up the calculations and get a little more confident in terms of some of the assumptions that we've made in that, and I'm sure that information will be available for the public.
Next question, Teresa Hitchens. I'm sorry, Kenneth, did you have a follow-up?
So the other two questions. So what actually would cause the reactor to go critical, and does this lengthen the launch window?
Perhaps Joe would like to answer that question. Go to the reactor.
Yeah, so once in water, the additional moderation of the water inside of the reactor would cause it to go critical if we didn't take advantage of the design process and installing those poison wires that we discussed before. So it won't go critical if it's in water, but if we didn't take these precautionary measures in both design and poison wire insertion, then the moderation from the water would cause it to go critical.
And the launch window?
So I'm not sure about the question on the launch window. Do you understand that question?
Yeah, currently there's only like a month or so, or 6 months or so, that you can launch a mission to Mars because of the orbit dynamics. With nuclear and you have continuous propulsion, you have a longer window to get to Mars.
Yeah, you've got the synodic period between Mars and Earth that we need to meet within some bounds on that. Of course, nuclear propulsion capabilities enable that window to open up, that would be able to take advantage of say quick trips to Mars and quick trips back. As far as the Draco mission goes, and the window to actually do the Draco mission, because we're not relying on some alignment in the orbits of a couple of planets, it really is going to come down to ground logistics for the launch and weather and things like that. So I don't see that it has a limited window on it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and let me pile on one more thing. So, and I'm sorry we're not giving you any numbers, and we're being careful because we haven't published those yet. But if you do pull up the table that's in NSPM 20, it'll show you what the thresholds are. And they're the categories in there. So you'll see the numbers in that table for standards of excellence, and just rest assured that we're under the the best numbers. And so again, if there was an accident, which there won't, which we're highly confident that there won't be, it would have been because we hadn't done anything to prevent an accident, which in the case of this program, we are doing everything we can to prevent an accident from happening, such as those wires, poison wires that Joe mentioned. You can also simply plug the nozzle to prevent water from going into the reactor, and other sort of measures. I think we have something like 3 or 4 prevention measures on the reactor right now. So it's almost like wearing 4 or 5 seatbelts at the same time. So we're good to go there.
For those who are less familiar with this term, would either you, Dr. Dodson, or Joe be able to explain what a poison wire is?
That'd be a great question for Joe. I can, but it's a Joe question.
Yeah, I think we could all explain it, but maybe Joe maybe have a nice way to explain it.
Yeah, just simply, it's a insertable wire that absorbs neutrons, therefore preventing the neutrons from creating a chain reaction, which therefore creates the fission process. And so this poison wire is essentially a metal that absorbs neutrons to prevent the reactor from going critical.
Much like a control rod in a terrestrial reactor. It's something that you can insert in the reactor and it shuts the reactor down. Only in this case, we'll have the control rod in there while we launch, and there'll be safety measures. Kind of, that might be one way to look at it.
Great, thank you both. Next question, Teresa Hitchens.
Hi there, thanks for doing this. And my apologies, as I was on another call and I missed the first few minutes of this press conference, so you might have already stated this and I just missed it. But I just want to clarify a couple of data points about the contract. Could you tell me what is involved in phase 2 and what is involved in the phase 3 option? And lastly, can you say what year, when you intend to actually launch Draco and begin actual operations or testing of this demonstration?
Mark, did you want to answer since you guys will be leading as the prime?
Sure. So phase 2 was to complete the critical design of the spacecraft, and then phase 3 was to actually build and launch and operate the vehicle. It sounds really simple. Of course, to build things, you actually have to order things, as you undoubtedly know. You have to order long lead parts during phase 2 that you actually use in phase 3. So in reality, it's a great thing that we've turned on, that DARPA and NASA chose to turn on phase 2 and 3 simultaneously. That just makes the entire program and the flow much better. Let's see. In terms of launch, I think we right now we're talking about the launch window being in the last quarter of 2025, or opening in the last quarter of 2025. So I would say sometime late 2025 through the early part of 26 will be when we would expect to launch and operate.
Okay.
And hope that answers your question.
Yeah, just one. I assume it'll take a couple months for you just to, like kind of check everything out before you actually launch the demonstration, right? After it's on orbit.
Well, normally, yes. But in this particular case, we have 20 degrees Kelvin liquid hydrogen, and everything is hot compared to 20 degrees Kelvin liquid hydrogen. So keeping the hydrogen around is a big challenge. So we will want to expedite the checkout of the spacecraft and of the nuclear reactor, such that we could, we'll have the maximum amount of hydrogen available. So we will be very expeditious, very thorough, but very expeditious in our checkout and test of the spacecraft, so that we can make the maximum effort or make maximum use of the hydrogen. That's our plan.
Thank you.
Okay, we're taking one last question, James Hillhouse.
All right, sorry about that. I wanted to ask about the level of thrust on the Draco
propulsion system, and whether that allows you to do parabolic trajectories, or do you end up needing to do spiral trajectories from low Earth orbit and slightly beyond that? Thank you.
Well, we are currently not planning to do orbit raising maneuvers, perhaps inclination changes. But when it comes to the thrust level of this engine, we're definitely not in the very, very low thrust levels as what you'd consider the kind that you would do spiral maneuvers with, like an electric propulsion system. Okay. We're in the thousands of KLBF range. So I think I'd prefer NASA to speak specifically to this, given it is their engine.
So thank you, Tab. So the one benefit from the NTP engine that we look at, aside from the higher propellant efficiencies that we get from the capability, is that the NTP capability can actually give us, as Tab said, thousands of pounds of thrust in space, up to tens of thousands, even up to 100,000 pounds of thrust. When we look at some of the Mars architecture studies that we put together, we're looking at 25,000 pound engines that we would potentially have for a Mars mission. They would be a direct Earth departure. We would need to spiral out from Earth to actually make that trip. So these engines are powerful enough to manage those gravity maneuvers that we need for that mission. In the case of Draco, one of the things that NASA, there are a lot of benefits to doing a demonstration at lower thrust levels in the order of what Tab was speaking to. They do require less propellant. They have lower mass. They have smaller sizes. There are all these benefits that can actually impact cost and schedule in a positive way. But one of the things that we also pay attention to is engineering relevance, right? So we don't want to get so small on the design of the thrust or the engine that we can't understand how that's going to engineeringly scale to these larger thrust levels. And I think for the Draco mission, we're right at the level where we can get that engineering relevance that we need to have a better understanding of these higher thrust engines.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. Thank you to our participants. We have one question that we received from Rich Smith via message. Rich, just taking note here, if you're still following along, NASA has taken this question, and we'll get back to you once they've consulted those numbers. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.